J.D. Greer was woke, and they wanted to have a woke church in Knightdale.
I feel like Jason came here to dismantle this church and sell us to Summit.
The more I think about it,
I think he had an agenda that he was trying to work fast.
They were dead set on giving this place to Summit.
I don't blame J.D. Greer or anybody for saying, hey, that's a great facility and we'd like to have it.
But when you try and steal something from us, why are you surprised when we fight back?
Our leaders closed the church.
We couldn't even come on this property at all.
And they could not even come in it and worship.
What was done to this church was evil. It was evil.
This building sat empty for a year.
And we were told that anybody that will come on their property will be arrested.
It broke our hearts. And Summit wants that building.
I would drive by here and look at my church and cry.
To all of you at Faith Baptist, know that I'm praying that you would grieve well as you end one chapter of your church's history and a true partnership with our Knightdale campus. I recognize that this merger would be an enormous transition for all of you.
So they always use the term merge. It was dissolution and a gift to Summit.
It just wasn't theirs to give away.
Our story needs to be shared just to save other churches from hurting.
Faith Baptist leadership steered the organization into bankruptcy after Pastor Little and Pastor Greer exchanged text messages with each other. And Summit injected $170,000 into Faith Baptist Church the same day the organization filed for bankruptcy.
Guess what that's used for? To fight us in court.
J.D. Greer was in fight mode.
But J.D. Greer was in fight mode way too late.
I went home to my knees and I called on the Lord to do something.
We were helping to fight with our prayers.
I said, look in my eyes. I don't quit.
There you have it. That is the trailer for a new documentary that is coming out, a series actually that is coming out on this attempt by Summit Church in Raleigh, North Carolina, in Durham, North Carolina, to essentially take over by dissolving this smaller church in Knightdale, North Carolina, so that they could have a building and a property for their campus church there. And it is a stunning story. You're not going to want to miss it. And right ahead of the SBC, this is exactly the kind of thing that people who are heading to that particular meeting need to think about. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And as people are coming into the stream, I know it's a little lighter because it is earlier in the morning. Some of you might be even on your commute, but I will take questions as they appear. I wanted to let everyone know real quick, the men's retreat that we host every year in the fall is open right now. So you can go to musicandmasculinity.com to sign up for the 2025 men's retreat in the beautiful Adirondack Mountains of New York. One of the best facilities. I just can't think of changing the facility because it's so nice. And we have had so many nice complimentary things said about this particular venue and just the event we put on. It's refreshing for men. We actually have 2 tracks, so we added an extra day this year. Thursday, September 25th through Sunday, September 28th. Of course, if you want to come just Friday, you can. There's a separate track, and it's less money, but we only charge cost. We're not making any money on this at all. It is for your benefit, and we have some good speakers this year, as always, but Pastor Tim Bushong is going to be there. He has a background in Christian music, and he's going to share with us about his experience in that particular field. We have Pastor Danny Steinmeier and his father, Mark Steinmeier. Mark is the pianist for Danny's church, and Mark is an exceptional pianist, very accomplished, and he's thought a lot about worship music, and he actually said some things that surprised even me, because I thought, the Gettys and Sovereign Grace and some of these newer, sort of more modern hymn approaches, those are pretty good, right? He doesn't necessarily think so. And I think his view of this, and it comes from a very music theory driven background. He showed me on the piano. I couldn't understand it till he showed me on the piano how some of these songs are different than some of the older hymns and some of the weaknesses that go into those melodies for congregational singing. He's going to share with us, and I'll obviously have a piano set up for him to show you all what he's talking about in regards to music. I don't know that you'll get this information anywhere else. And of course, my own father, Scott Harris, is going to be there, Pastor Grace Bible Church, and our cartoon character, our first cartoon character. I took A.D. Robles's stock footage from his X account, and I asked all the gentlemen, I said, if you want to send a picture to me, you certainly can. But AD, and actually none of them sent me any pictures, so I just went with, for now, what AD has on X. I think he likes it, though. I think he likes his rendering here. I don't know if this was AI or someone actually. I don't think anyone took a pencil, but AD Robles is going to be there as well. He won't be talking about music. We actually have the topics here. I'm going to kick it off with the defensive tradition, and AD is going to be talking about the daily grind and kind of like work-life balance things. And then we have a bunch of stuff on music, and it's just going to be good. So I hope you can make it out for that. musicandmasculinity.com. It is the last weekend of September in the beautiful Adirondack Mountains of New York. And Mike Kavanaugh says it is the best men's conference retreat around. Thank you, Mike, and it was good to have you there. We got Cenk. Is it Ugur? Is that how you say? I know it's a Turkish last name, but Cenk, I think it's Ugur. Is how do you do, fellow Christians? Thanks, Cenk. You gotta love the. Sometimes I get confused by Anon accounts because they'll use B-list or C-list celebrities, which you think sometimes, well, that person might actually be wandering onto my stream. That is possible, and then I get confused and I wonder, is it them or is it someone who's actually impersonating them? But if it really is Cenk, please repent and turn to Christ for salvation and repent of your sins, brother. There is a lot of freedom that you can find, the greatest freedom that you can find of any kind of freedom in the cross of Jesus Christ. So there you go. Well, we are going to talk about a number of things that, as always, I think matter, especially to Christians and particularly conservative Christians in the United States. And it's sort of a smattering of things. I do try to talk about some political topics, and I do want to start there. But because I mentioned and I played for you this documentary, I think I should at least say a few things about the Southern Baptist Convention this year, because it is next week. And if you are going to the Southern Baptist Convention and you are dissatisfied with the direction it's gone in recent years, I would highly suggest you check out the Center for Baptist Leadership. I believe it is the 10th, if I'm not mistaken, that they are doing their event, but you can check it out. Go to their website. I think it's centerforbaptistleadership.com, and you can sign up. And let me just make sure that I've got the right website. Yes, it is centerforbaptistleadership.org, so it's not .com. But you can go there, sign up for the event that they have, and you will be able to meet some like-minded Southern Baptists while you're there. So I wanted to say that. And I wanted to also let you know, I don't know. I'm not the prophet or a son of a prophet, so I don't know exactly what's going to happen at the convention. Some things can just happen on the floor of the convention. Someone can make a motion. But I do have a pretty strong instinct that, because I've heard the chatter, there is going to be an attempt to defund or end the ERLC. And for those who don't know, the ERLC is an organization, it's an entity is how they call it, in the Southern Baptist Convention that has been responsible for a lot of the leftist framing that you've seen in recent years coming from the SBC. I realize seminaries have been big in this, especially the one I graduated from, Southeastern, but the ERLC is probably, if you topple that, then you can get at some of these other things. They've been the stronghold for more progressive-leaning Southern Baptists, and so I think that would be a great thing to have happen. Now, whether it's going to happen is another story. And you can see that there's been chatter online about the strategies being employed to prevent this kind of thing from happening. And I'm not going to make a prediction either way about it. I try to stay away from those predictions. I'm going to make a little prediction about how J.D. Greear is going to react to this documentary in a moment. But as far as the SBC, a lot of things could happen. And if you are in the fight still, that is an issue that just to be ready for. I think in regards to this documentary, though, this obviously has not dropped yet. You've just seen a trailer. And I think the information in this particular piece, when it does drop, it will be somewhat of a bombshell for people who maybe live in that particular area of North Carolina and are Christians, or just Southern Baptists in general, because J.D. Greear was president of the convention and still holds a lot of influence in the Southern Baptist Convention. And I think what's going to happen here is J.D. Greear, and I think it's already started to some extent, but J.D. Greear will likely do some of the things David Platt did. If you remember when David Platt was kind of on the hook for what he did at McLean, he started posting on social media about mission stuff, where he was, the priorities true Christians should have, which is obviously the gospel, and he tried to shift the focus. So instead of responding directly to the accusations, to the actual information that was out there that was so revealing about his character and the way he ran that church, he decided to focus to do this pious move of, here's what I'm doing. What I'm doing is so important. What we're doing is so important. If you really want to be used for Christ, and this works on some Christians, I'm just going to say it. It really does, because we know that the Great Commission is our mission as Christians in the world. We are supposed to be making disciples. And so when you try to stave off as a shield the criticism you're getting by saying, look what I'm doing the most important thing, there's Christians that'll resonate with that. I don't think many. I think the return is diminishing. But Greear has already started to do things that make me think that that's where he's headed, showing, hey, here I am. I'm at our Knightdale campus, right? And this obviously has people in it who have been former members of FBC, Faith Baptist Church Knightdale, and now they're at Summit's campus in Knightdale, and showing that this is what we're doing in the Knightdale community, showing the successful things. Like, I just had this great whatever it was 10-year anniversary at the church, and look at all these people. Look at where we're doing. We're planting churches. We're doing the things we're supposed to do. I saw a comment on social media recently. Some people, I'm not going to show you the screenshot, but some people think it is from someone within Greer's church, and because some of the language that's used, I think it's a YouTube comment on the trailer, but the whole thing is that we should be doing gospel work, and this just distracts from it. This is terrible. It's not even good journalism, right? Because good journalism gets both sides and so forth. And I guess what I would say is, look, if you're going to dissolve a church that's in existence, if you're going to try to manipulate things to get that church's property, if you're going to use underhanded tactics to disqualify people from voting membership who would prevent you from achieving that goal, if you are going to end ministries that have been there and beneficial in the community and spreading the gospel, if you are going to suck up the time of Christians by refusing mediation and incurring all these lawyers' fees and all the time that goes into that over the course of years, I have to question where your priorities are. Are they really the gospel of Jesus Christ in Knightdale or in Raleigh or wherever? Or is there something else going on here? And Christians who just want their church, some of them who've been there for years, I don't blame them for saying, no, not our church. We actually were doing good gospel work here, and you came in and messed it up, and we don't want you doing that to other churches for the sake of the gospel. So I see the motive completely reverse of the narrative that I see being formed on this. And as for journalism stuff, just to, because that may come up, is like, well, the people who put this together, they were just looking at one side. Well, look, this isn't a journalistic outfit as far as, like, it's not the Associated Press who's coming in to do a story on this. These are people who were railroaded that want to share their story to prevent it from happening in other places. And Summit is more than free to have to answer these objections, to come out and put information out there that might answer them. But I don't think they're going to be able to do it. I think if they even attempt to do that, it's going to be kind of passive aggressive insinuations. It cannot, the substance isn't going to work for them. It's just not. And that's my prediction. I don't think that they're going to get into substance. If J.D. Greear does anything, it'll be through surrogates. It'll be, if there are news stories on this, Amy Whitfield will be trying to squash those. That's how this whole thing will play out. I don't think you're going to see a direct answer for any of the clear questions. That's my prediction on that, and we'll see what happens. I think it's a good reason to, if you're a conservative in the SBC, be motivated as you go to the convention. Whether or not this is going to move any policies, or I don't think there's going to be a vote on the floor to do anything about this kind of a situation. I don't know what that would even look like, but it at least gives you a motivation for knowing, hey, there are forces out there not good in the SBC, and they need to be dealt with. So look forward to that coming out. Very soon you will see the first episode dropping, and it's some people have already seen that, including myself, and I think that you're going to be really well, I don't know, some of you might not be surprised if you listen to this podcast, but I think some of you, especially if you haven't for a while listened to this podcast, you will be surprised at how professing Christians can treat other Christians. It's just incredible to me, the politics of it. So I will continue. Let's see. Someone's saying the audio is soft. Is anyone else hearing soft audio? Because I got the levels are up. So if anyone else is hearing that, I'll try to adjust it. But if not, then I'm just going to keep going here. Romans 8 says, John, I want to DM you about two matters which are contentious. I don't want you to block or unfollow me. Everything I want to say is in good faith. Okay. Appreciate your work. Go ahead, DM me. Yeah, I don't know who Romans 8 Shaman. I know I've seen the logo there, so definitely go for it. It's a bit soft. Okay, let me just really quickly, if I can do this real quickly. Let's see. I have an automatic mic volume adjustment setting on. Maybe that's what's doing this. I'm going to take that off. Now see if echo cancellation. Okay. So I've changed some things. Let me know if that audio quality is better. Okay, what are you talking about is going to be released on this channel, I take it? Oh, the documentaries. That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know about that. Maybe, but it wouldn't be the first place to see it. I think you're going to want to follow the Church Reform Initiative. So you can follow them on social media. They're on Facebook, they're on YouTube, they're on X. So follow the Church Reform Initiative and you will get the first viewing of that. So yeah, please, someone let me know if the audio is better now. Sounds good to me. So, okay. I don't know. I don't hear myself out there. So louder now sounds good. All right, good. Well, we'll keep it this way then. Thoughts on VBS? Is it biblical? Man, I don't know if I can give the time for that. I happen to like the idea of VBS. I guess if you're a strict, like a regulative principle person, maybe not, but I tend to like it. Okay, let's keep going here. I want to get into some political things really briefly and summarize them, and then we'll get into some more Christian related things. This is an article from the Federalist on this big, beautiful bill that Donald Trump talked about. And I think so Christopher Jacobs wrote this. I think it actually nails the issue with this. Elon Musk is very upset that this spending bill did not take into account the recommendations of DOJ for cutting spending. But Christopher Jacobs, as he gets into this, he talks about a number of the priorities and how this particular bill seems to send a mixed message on where the Republican Party is heading. So I'm going to just read a little bit of this. He says on the issue of deficits, on the one hand, the bill contains the largest spending reductions that Congress has passed in decades, but on the net, the bill will increase the deficit and also includes a massive increase in the debt limit, effectively killing Congress's motivation to go back a second time and cut spending again next year. It also does absolutely nothing to reform Medicare and Social Security. So we just keep kicking that ball down the road, that can down the road. Medicaid, the bill does slow the growth of Medicaid by a significant amount. It does so by incorporating several policies, from freezing the provider tax scam to ensuring budget neutrality for Medicaid waivers. On the other hand, some might argue the bill represents the worst of both worlds for Republicans. It subjects them to political attacks for reducing Medicaid spending growth, but it does not make enough reductions to change the program's explosive growth in fundamental ways. And a last-minute insertion allowing a non-expansion states to increase their Medicaid funding rather than changing the dynamic whereby states receive a higher federal match for enrolling able-bodied adults under Obamacare than the most vulnerable patients attempted to solve a disparity between expansion and non-expansion states by throwing more money at it. Now, what he's saying is this is such a mixed bill. There's good things, but then it's counteracted by things that actually open themselves up to attacks and increase spending. So he does this on a number of issues, on taxes, on defense. There's a larger military buildup here. So the legislation will provide needed resources. So that's a good thing. But his major conclusion here is that the problem with a bill like this, so he says, say what you will about Obamacare, at least Democrats knew what they wanted. Okay, so Democrats were very firm to accomplish via legislation, even if I disagreed with it. But Cass suggests rightly that even if the bill passes and gets signed into law, the policy muddle inside it will prove difficult to explain and difficult to defend. And this is, I think, the main issue with the Republicans right now. So you have Donald Trump and J.D. Vance setting a new direction forward, which I think in some ways is a better direction, at least on getting away from some of these Proposition Nation neoconservative assumptions. I think there's more of an opening for authentic conservatives to finally have a seat at the table. I think Christians actually are going to they already do have a better deal in the Trump administration. Even if it's a smaller seat, they have a real seat at the table. The problem I see, though, is this a broad enough coalition that's going to be able to get to come together around very specific policy things and sustain that, right? So if it's just an anti-left, if that's what the coalition is built on, is we just don't like the left, you have all kinds of different interests represented in that. And because of that broadness, and because there are very few people, Donald Trump being obviously the exception to this, but there are very few people with the gravitas and the respect among the various interest groups to actually hold the coalition together. It's in a crisis mode. And I think the Democrats actually now do have something similar. They do have more of they work like a well-oiled machine. They have authorities in academia and the media and other areas that are influential. But as far as having actual leaders in the party, who is it? Is it David Hogg? Is it the governor of California? Is it who actually runs the Democrat Party, who has the gravitas to pull these elements together? I think they're running into some similar problems. But the Republicans, obviously, once Trump is gone, that vacuum, I just don't even know what it looks like. Because even under Trump, you're having these compromises that make not to take a verse out of context, but it seems to be like how will the people know what's being said if the sound is unclear, right? And that's what's happening here. The sound is a little muddled. It's unclear. People don't know exactly where things are going. And of course, Elon Musk is very upset about it because his thing was cut the spending. So we will experience a vacuum after Trump, says Marby Dog. I think you're absolutely right on that. It's his lion personality that is able to hold things together, and that's not going to last forever. So not to be a black pillar here, but that's just reality. We have to deal with reality. Now, speaking of real threats, FBI says 8 injured in Colorado, attacked by a man with makeshift flamethrower who yelled "Free Palestine." Some of you are aware of this story, but this happened a few days ago. Sabri Suleiman, who is 45 and has a family, by the way, I think he has like 4 kids or something, decided that he would go and he would start trying to burn people for supporting Israel, or at least he wanted to do this in the cause of anti-Israel, pro-Palestine stuff in Colorado. And the only, I guess, reason I bring this up is yes, this is someone that actually, this episode's probably not the best, this article probably isn't the best episode, article. I don't know why I said episode. because I believe, maybe it's buried in here somewhere, this guy was not here legally, but I don't see it in this particular article. I saw that in another article, I think. But anyway, the reason I wanted to bring it up, though, was this. The whole conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine, I've been pretty consistent on, I look at this and I think America has so many issues. We have our own border problems. We have our own financial issues. We have a looming debt. And we don't have the bandwidth to be able to, even if it was right and constitutional and all the rest, we still don't have the bandwidth to be able to, for this foreseeable future, be involved in every conflict that's out there. But because of our immigration policies and because of the stances that political parties are taking on these issues, because you have foreign interests in this country who are they really want us to be focused on our attention on this and spending on this and crafting policies, we end up getting forced into a domestic situation where it becomes our problem, right? And we're seeing this on college campuses, but this is an act of terrorism, essentially, that's against Israel, but it's happening on our soil. And it's a concerning thing to me, just because I think one of the things that I've noticed over the last 5 years, since 2020, it's been amped up, is there is an identity crisis in the United States. There's no doubt about that. Wherever you look, there seems to be an identity crisis. Who are we? What do we stand for? What even is an American? Why are we here? And let's try to define it by this metric or that metric. And often people who are coming to these ideas at stages in their life where it was not an inherited tradition, it is something that they are grabbing onto in an ideological way. And it opens us up to sometimes more of these foreign conflicts. If you're a social justice warrior, I mean, this is the thing, right? Being anti-Israel is that's the top echelon of white person, are the Israelis who are using their quote unquote apartheid system against these poor Palestinians. If you are someone who's getting kind of sucked into the more anti-Jewish and bioreductionist stuff, you can tend towards Israel is terrible and we need to support the Palestinians because Israel is a threat to white people, and white people is now the big in-group preference that we need to be thinking about as Americans. So I'm not saying those are the only motivations, but I know that these motivations, I think, will increase. And and I think the concern I have as an American is it increases the interest in these foreign conflicts on our shores. And I wish there was someone, we'll see what happens in the next few years, but it would be nice if there was someone who really took an America first stance on these things and said, you know what, the Israel lobby, the social justice people interested in the Palestinian cause, not really our problem. Let Israel do what Israel is going to do. Let's not fund them at the levels we've been funding them, and let's not yank their chain. Let's let things play out a little more and stop being as concerned and involved, especially with our money, because I think that does attract a foreign element to get involved in our politics when our politics is so linked to the politics over there, if that makes sense. I don't know exactly what Donald Trump thinks in his mind. Obviously, he's pretty pro-Israel, but there's been some changes to that recently. And it would just be nice to get back to an America first foreign policy on these things, especially in the financial condition we're in. And I do think it is situational. It doesn't mean that you can't, do kind of like with Lend-Lease in World War II. It doesn't mean you can't trade. It doesn't mean you can't have other ways of supporting allies, but it does mean we don't have that. I mean, the money we've given to Ukraine, Israel pales in comparison to that. It's insane. It's absolutely insane the last few years. We just can't do it. We have to have a country, right? And I look into my daughter's eyes. I think about my children, and I'm like, we're still on the same path. We elected Donald Trump, and it slowed things down, and it's changed some things. And I do see some highlights that I'm going to share with you in a moment that I see is very good for our culture. But I still have that cautious optimism about it. We still seem to be on a trajectory that is going to land us in the spot that 5 years ago we were concerned about. It's just getting us there by different routes and in a slower way. So anyway, I'll take a few questions. We'll keep going here. Juan says, Brent Leatherwood has opposed the equal protection under the civil law for children in their mother's wombs. He must be removed from leadership. Yes, in Louisiana in particularly. He has the ERLC for the SBC has certainly gone against those bills, and it's a big problem. John Carter says it sure would be nice if some organized Jewish groups use their money and influence to prove those nefarious conspiracy theorists wrong by defending white Christians. I'm not sure exactly what that would look like, but I guess in South Africa or I don't know. Yeah, I mean, but the thing, I don't really blame Israel for this, to be quite honest with you. I blame sometimes us for politicians in this country for being foolish, but every group's going to have their own best interests. Every country's, except us, apparently. It's like we're the one place that isn't supposed to have a preference for our own people. And America first is so controversial. That's actually a rightly ordered thing. Have a preference for the people that live near you, that you share a body politic with, that affect the future of your own children. Even if the United States is an empire, which I think it is, it's a culmination of nations. Have a preference for your region, have a preference for the empire you live in. You want your place that you live in to be the best. And I don't blame Israel for wanting that. And if they see the United States as a place that they can obtain resources from and support from in their own nationalistic endeavors, yeah, it makes sense. If you're I think it was Ben Shapiro said he could do, the reason he's not in Israel is because he could do more for Israel in the United States than in Israel. Well, that's there's no other way to square that. That's a foreign element who wants to use a foreign element in the sense of his interests are this other country, but he wants to use the United States resources. That's where his loyalty is, for this other country. I understand it. I get it, but we can't, that's not our priority, right? That's my thing. Why is Trump so bad on Putin? I don't know where that question could be coming from different angles. Bad in what sense? Because he's too pro-Putin or too anti-Putin? I think Trump just wants people to stop dying and wants there to be peace. And he's expanded the concern of the United States beyond the borders of this country to these other places where he inherited this. Obviously, he inherited these conflicts, but he wants these conflicts to go away in the quickest manner possible. I respect that. But some of these conflicts, like the Israel-Palestine conflict, it's hard to see any solution that doesn't include a war that solves it. I hate to say it. It's just, you have to be realistic about some of these things too, and look at the history of the region. Okay. Yeah. Ben Shapiro said that about Singapore or Hungary or Uganda. Would we think the same way? I wouldn't. I would think that that's still a problem. But I think, yeah, if you're talking about like the Republican Party or the Democratic Party for that matter, no, I mean, I don't have the time to get into all of it right now, but there are complicated reasons, I think, for why the United States feels a special kind of kinship for some countries, or a protective kind of maternal element that they have and not others. Israel is one of the ones at the top of that list. And there's a number of reasons, I think, for it. But that is, yeah, there's a favoritism there for sure. Let me get to some other issues here. We have the Daily Signal. I looked at this morning, brand new, hot off the press. Actually, this is from yesterday. We're only 3 days into Pride Month, but things are already getting weird and wild. And there's a few examples here. And this is the thing that struck me about this. They're mostly local examples. So you have the Washington, D.C., the mayor says we're the gayest city in the world. And they have their events, and they're doing this play on 12th night, this Shakespeare play, and emphasizing gender fluidity. You have Governor Tim Walz here. Happy Pride Month, Minnesota. When I was in Minnesota, I think it was 2 years ago, all the rest stops as you're driving down the highway had these trans flags. I think some of them didn't even, maybe I didn't see them, but I don't remember seeing American flags, but they definitely had trans flags. Yeah, it was June, and that's Governor Tim Walz for you. But this is happening still, and it's happening, though, I think, in more deep blue areas. There's been a shift, because if you remember a few years ago, not even, 2021, 2022, it seemed like this was everywhere. This was, you log into your email account, and it's like every corporation you've ever done business with is emailing you about Pride Month. They're telling you about what they're doing. I don't have any of that. unless my spam detector's got it good. I don't have any of it. It's not blatant in front of me on streaming services, right? It's not blatantly in front of me at the grocery store like it was, at least. It's still happening in blue areas, though. They're not giving up on this. So is it dormant? Will it come back? I think the best explanation is that people are intimidated and they will go where the power's telling them to go. Power really does affect culture. And when we had very powerful forces, especially in the White House, dictating this is our agenda, and corporations following suit, then everyone else seemed to want to fall into line, or at least to avoid getting smashed by that particular hammer. Well, now CNN, of all places, has a headline: big brands are pulling back on Pride merchandise and events this year. So CNN's admitting this, that there's a change going on. I noticed that American Airlines, for example, and Paramount were highlighted in a chart that's going around social media that they don't have Pride colors on their logos. Now, that is true, but if you go to their actual websites, you will find they are still doing things in celebration of quote unquote Pride Month. But it's not as overt. They're not just exposing everyone to that through their logos. I'd say I want to take the W on this. That's a win. That's a good thing. Why is it happening? I think you have a different administration. And I think the LGBT people pushed way too far on this stuff, the activists at least. And there's a bit of a kickback. There's a bit of a blowback against it. Now, are we returning to pre-Obergefell levels? No, we're not. And I think it's too early to tell whether this is a kind of like a one step forward, two steps back thing. I don't know yet. I still go to hiking places in New York, and I still see, as I'm rolling in, the sticker that says Pride Outdoors. I'm not kidding. And I think I've become somewhat desensitized to it. I'm going to be honest. I think we all have. Would we even, when this first started, we all noticed it. Now, I don't know if we notice it as much. And that could be part of the equation here too. But there's no doubt that there is a pulling back on this. And corporations, they want to sell things too, right? It doesn't make sense for them to make decisions that offend half their customer base. So I think that's encouraging, and I'm just going to take that as a win, and hopefully that expands. There's actually a story that I had queued up, and now I think I lost it. Oh, no, I didn't lose it. Here it is. This is a story along these lines. Republican support for same-sex marriage drops ahead of 10th anniversary of Obergefell, according to a poll. This is fascinating. A Gallup poll found, and this is only surveying 1,000 Americans, but I mean, Gallup's not too bad, right? This is a recent poll too. It was done in May, and they said that ahead of the 10th anniversary of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Obergefell, wow, was that 10 years ago? I cannot believe it. It was yesterday in my mind. Most Americans, 68%, said they believe same-sex marriages should be recognized as valid. This constitutes a slight drop from the record high of 71% measured in 2022 and 2023. Broken down by political parties, the results of the survey reveal a widening gap. Support for same-sex marriage among Democrats reached a record high of 88% this year. Okay, so this is confirming what I'm saying. In deep blue areas, they're still on going that trajectory. By contrast, approval of same-sex marriage among Republicans was measured at just 41% this year, marked the third consecutive year where support has dropped. The record high was 55% in both 2021 and 2022. So that means that in 3 years, we went from 55% support in the Republican Party to 41%. That is not insignificant, and that might be because of Zoomer males, and their attraction to the Republican Party. I don't know if that's in the data or not, but that would be my initial thought, because Zoomer females are very pro-LGBT. Zoomer males are more and more against it. Among independents who do not identify with either party, 76% supported same-sex marriage. This marks an increase from the amount of support measured by independents last year. So this is a mixed thing. This is not anything to throw a party about, but it is something to keep an eye on and be thankful for, that some people seem to be growing a conscience about this, or at least they're seeing reasons to back off any support and maybe not withhold support from this. And I have seen, I'm going to say, this is obviously my opinion, but in my own life, I have seen people who were actively for homosexual marriage, wedding ceremonies, back off that support. I have seen that firsthand. And the reason for it primarily has to do with how far the transgender stuff got pushed. And when it got pushed that far, people then had to start thinking about, well, is there a difference between a man and a woman? I don't want them competing in sports, men with women. So is there a difference between them? And if there is a difference, that routes you right back into, well, maybe gay marriage wasn't a good idea. And then that routes you into maybe feminism isn't such a good idea. And you get on this red pill journey. And I think that that's what happened, honestly. They pushed so far, so fast, and it made people had to defy common sense. People who I think thought, this isn't going to affect my marriage. They just want to do their thing. It's not going to do anything to society. And then they thought, oh no, it is doing something to society. Maybe I ought to rethink my position. So that's my explanation for this dynamic. But I do think that things are changing. It's a good change. And hopefully that inspires you to be more bold about this issue. You can be a little more bullish. I mean, you should be anyway, but maybe this, if you're timid, maybe this will help you. So Truttle says, despite Trump being terrible on this issue, the implicit aesthetic he's courted contributes heavily to this phenomenon. I totally agree. He had Christians, I think just recently, it was on June 1st, if I'm not mistaken, praying I think it was in the White House, if I'm not mistaken, but just recently this happened. And he is specifically platforming Christians, letting Christians kind of do their thing. And he is not going out of his way to say anything in support, at least from what I've seen, of Pride Month. They do like to plaster the flags of their blasphemous religion everywhere they can. Okay, well, that is true. I see it in my area, but I'm in a blue area. Have you heard of the recent ruckus with Redeem Zoomer and Gavin Ortland? I think maybe if you're talking about Redeem Zoomer, I think he said something like he would support going to a church that was doctrinally unsound, like severely, like they didn't believe in certain fundamental doctrines. I don't remember if it was a Trinity or what it was, but in order to accomplish the reconquista of these denominations. Yeah, I totally disagree with that, obviously. If that's what you're talking about, I think I did see that. John Carter says, encouraging that Zoomers are rejecting pride and sodomy, but we better make sure they don't think that Jews had anything to do with LGBT ideology before we allow them in our churches. There's some sarcasm there coming from John Carter. Well, we'll get to, I think, the issue he's talking about in a moment, which is this article from Will Spencer. Obviously, there's Jewish involvement in a lot of these things, higher levels in most of the progressive causes. And that's been that way for quite a while. A lot of these revolutionary movements, though, did pre-exist the heavy levels of immigration, at least in America. One last thing I wanted to share with you. This is from the Christian Post. Is it okay to kill unborn babies with deformities? NT Wright weighs in. Oh, man. This was interesting to me. I didn't think NT Wright would go this far. Even I don't like NT Wright at all. I think that he's terrible. The whole label NT wrong makes a lot of sense to me. But he decided to say it on a podcast. And it was with Michael Bird, of all people. Michael Bird's also terrible. But he decided to say on a podcast that, let's see if I can find the exact quote. After explaining how the doctor recommended that the woman terminate the pregnancy if there was a serious deformation of the unborn baby, Wright suggested that this move was justified. At the time, it was absolutely clear for the mental health, never mind anything else, of the mother and the potential father as well, that this was the way to go. He acknowledged that the baby in this case was ultimately born because the rubella had actually not done what it sometimes might do. So abortion is justified in certain cases. It's a very sensitive issue, he says. This is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. And I don't know if I even have the words. I didn't think you should listen to NT Wright before on anything ethical. And now obviously you really shouldn't listen to NT Wright. There's a clip that was going around of him with Francis Collins on their guitar, sounding like hippies, talking about evolution and the miracle of evolution. And Genesis talks about this, and as far biologos. And it's just, I don't know, it's that image just sums him up for me. Like, this is kind of a new left hippie character who somehow became the most respectable person in Great Britain among supposed conservative evangelicals. I don't know, how are you conservative evangelical if this is the guy, right? If Francis Collins, the respectable person among supposed doctrinally orthodox conservative evangelicals in the United States, how can you say that movement is conservative in any sense? Like, we get these progressives at the top of the movements, and then I don't know, it's like they're not as progressive as the alternative in the PC USA or the Episcopalian church, but it's like they're driving you to the same location at a slower setting. If you're still okay with murdering babies, like, what's the difference, right? So, all right, let's see. Were we there? Oh, one last thing so I did this episode yesterday on guilt by association, and I think that's actually going to play into the next two things I want to talk about a little bit. I was glad that I did the article before some of the blowback I'm getting for sharing this Will Spencer article, to be honest with you, because I think I already kind of framed what the difference in associations are. But this is another issue I saw on guilt by association that's coming up, and it's Turning Point USA. And of course, this comes up quite a bit with them because they have such a broad spectrum of people that they platform. And I guess the only thing I want to say about this, the most of the blowback is because they have Nayla Ray there. Nayla Ray is a former pornographic actress, and she has converted to Christianity. She has been a Christian for about 1.5 years or 2 years, I forget, but still fairly new. And she's being platformed at this event. And there's some people who are very sensitive to this fact that say she's too new. And I understand why, because there is this instinct in conservative circles to take anyone with a platform, and because of the desire to be cool, because there's this feeling of inferiority that many Christian, especially Christian organizations and celebrities have, they want to lash on to that. So Kanye West is a good example of this, right? Does anyone from Christianity, like, does Joel Osteen, who had Kanye West, and I say Christianity, in quotes here, does Kanye West want to have Kanye West at his church? I don't think so. I think Kanye West is persona non grata. But a few years ago, of course, we need to have this person in our church. He's a new believer. He just made a profession. And I was encouraged by that at the time. I thought, that's great. I think I even bought, I'm not a hip hop guy at all, but I bought his album just to support it. And I wanted to see that get high marks in the music industry at the time. But I never would have wanted to see him platformed, right? If he wants to do conferences and he wants to bring in Christians to do a gospel presentation, that's one thing. But if you are presenting him to the world as, hey, he's your new Christian leader here, and that the same goes for Russell Brand and fill in the blank, that's not a wise thing. You are taking someone, I mean, there's a reason that eldership qualifications requires that someone's not a new convert. You're taking someone who does not have the experience, and you don't even know where the seed fell, if it's on rocky soil yet. And you're now saying to all of the Christians out there, follow this guy. And so I get the instinct here, but I am going to disagree. I actually think if what Nayla Ray does, and this is an if, is she comes and shares her testimony, I think it's a powerful thing. OnlyFans is huge. Zoomers who are having a hard time forming actual relationships and marriages are on OnlyFans. I think having Nayla Ray there to talk about this and give her testimony of why that was a deep, dark road and how she's a Christian now is actually a beneficial thing. And I don't think you have to make her a Christian, celebrity or thought leader or something like that. Now, I don't know what she's going to talk about. So maybe my assessment of this is off, and they are doing that with her. But if she's been a Christian for 2 years, that is 2 years. I don't think that's anything to sneeze at. That is some time. She's still a new Christian for sure. But if all she's doing is going to come and share her testimony, I'm pretty supportive of that. And I think we got to be careful of being too overly sensitive to this dynamic as well. Of just like, there is this sort of sense of, we've been beaten down so many times. Everyone betrays us. Everything goes bad. Everyone's a sellout. Everyone's just controlled opposition. It's all an op. that you can get into this mindset of like the dog when his master picks up the newspaper. It's like, he's going to beat me again. Like, it's just, it compromises around every corner. And I like to suggest it's not actually around every corner, just most of the corners, but not every corner. And I think if you think about this, you could see a route where this makes sense. Now, I don't know about all the other people in this poster, and I'm not here to call shots on all of this. Obviously, Tulsi Gabbard, to me, that's an odd pick. She's kind of like highlighted in the center here. I didn't actually know she was a Christian. It is, I mean, it's a weird thing too, a turning point, right? Because they're kind of, they had rainbow flags at their booth at CPAC in 2020. We're 5 years later, and now they're not only a conservative organization, but a semi-Christian organization. And I don't know if they know exactly what they are. They're kind of in motion, becoming something. And pray for the people that are Christians in the organization trying to put it down the right path. I mean, obviously, Leela Rose is Catholic. So this is not a Protestant event. This looks like it's probably more of a political event. That's what I'm guessing. So maybe Tulsi Gabbard makes sense from that angle. But I think there's confusion because of Turning Point USA. They've gotten into doing Christian conferences now, and that's created. And, Nancy Mace. I didn't even catch this. Nancy Mace is going to be okay. Yeah, Nancy Mace is probably not the person you want as a young woman's role model. Just saying. Man. Okay, so there are some. I would actually be more worried about Nancy Mace than I would Naylor Ray. That's just me. Okay, let's get into. Okay, yeah, we're gonna get into this now. So I shared this article yesterday. Oh, let me see if there's any questions first, and then I'll get into this. Hot take, but featuring Nancy Mace is bad. Yeah, thank you, Treadle. Thank you. You said it before I did. Platforming Nancy Mace is bad or worse. Let's see. Calvin Robinson is far more conservative than N.T. Wright. We rarely hear anything about him. Yeah, if British evangelicals want to platform someone, or I guess, I don't even know. The Calvin Robinson's what? Anglo-Catholic. If Anglicans want to platform someone, maybe Calvin Robinson would be a better alternative than N.T. Wright. I don't know. I don't have a dog in that fight necessarily, but everyone seems to agree Nancy Mace is worse. Yes. Someone is saying that Gabbard has a Hindu background. That would not surprise me. So, all right, let's talk about this. I want to talk about this article a little bit. I wasn't planning on spending a lot of time on this, but since I got significant blowback for just posting it on X, I figured I might spend a little more time on it. This is an article on Christ Overall. I actually appreciate a lot of what they're trying to do. I think they're an organization that has pushed the needle in a good direction, and they are they're not as I don't know how to put this. They're an avenue into more academically elite spheres in evangelicalism, more so than maybe a truth script would be. But I think there's a place for that. They're a bit different than American Reformer. They're not going to post the same things American Reformer is going to post on the political stuff. They're a little more church focused. So I also appreciate that. I think there's a good space for them, and I'm actually glad that they're doing what they're doing. But they posted this article from a guy named Will Spencer. Will Spencer, for those who don't know, has been on my podcast once before, sharing his testimony, kind of like what I was just talking about with Naylor Ray. He was a new Christian. I think he had been saved about 2 years or a year. I don't even remember. But he had come out of the New Age movement. And he had tried everything in the New Age movement. I mean, his experience, from what he said at least, was extensive. And so I thought it was a prudent thing to have him talk about why that was a dead end. And I think he did a pretty good job on the podcast. And I actually got a lot of positive feedback for that podcast. He had me on his podcast. And at the time he had me on his podcast, there was I didn't follow every detail of it, but there was some dramatic stuff going on between him and one of the co-hosts of the Stone Choir podcast, which they have a reputation for being quite saying very flamethrower type things on X, and being a bit I don't know, just erratic and forwarding kind of a neo-Nazi light narrative. So anyway, he was talking to this guy, and he hosted them on his podcast, right? And then he backtracked it, like the day. So he posted a podcast episode that he did with those guys, and then on the day of, he took it down and issued an apology, I think the next day. And it was like right after that I was being interviewed by him for his podcast, which I had agreed to do long before this. And this was before there were some screenshots put out there, but we talked about it a little bit off camera. And I the funny part to me is I actually told him, I said, look, if you were talking to those guys, I wouldn't be surprised if that stuff makes its way public. Just because there was one other guy too, I told this to, that I'm not going to say his name because he might not appreciate it, but you would recognize who he is. And I was like, I just think that, that I could just see the spirit of the guys on that podcast. They're the kind of people that would share private text messages in my mind. And sure enough, it was like the next day, all these text messages come out after I'd done the interview. And they show that Will Spencer was mild. I don't really know how to say it other than this. He was very supportive of the narratives that they were pushing, at least some of them. He was not ignorant to them. And this was about a year ago, right? So I think one of the objections people have, and it's a personal objection, is, hey, this guy's erratic. This guy seems to switch sides at the flip of a hat. This guy seems like he's not well rooted, like some of the things he's criticizing, he's guilty of. Not the kind of guy you want to make an authority on any of this. And I totally get all those things. And I actually largely agree with them, to be honest with you. Will Spencer might not like me saying this, but I totally understand that. I understood that before I shared the article. So I'm just going to say that, personal things aside, I'm not trying to platform Will Spencer as like a thought leader on this topic or any topic in particular. My thing is, I think this article brought out some threads that I have not seen connected except in oral conversations with others. So guys that I personally know, that I know very well, that are personal friends, have told me basically verbatim, almost like what Will Spencer says in this article, about how they became attracted to neo-Nazi ideology or genetic reductionist kind of ideology, whether it's the neo-Nazi flavor or whatnot. And I multiple people have told me that I know personally, like, started on 4chan. I watched these revisionist documentaries. I got hooked into the manosphere and got red pilled, and the red pill just continued into these other arenas. And I woke up one day and realized that this was bad. This was unhealthy. This was bad. I had gone down this dark road, whatever. And so I haven't seen anyone tie those things together before. Maybe I'm just not looking in the right places, but someone sent this to me, and Will Spencer tied them together. And it was kind of a casual thought. I was like, oh, I'll share this because it seemed like it was directed at pastors. And I wanted pastors who are navigating this with some of the people in their congregations to at least be aware of, for some, I think, and I'm not going to put a percentage on it, but for at least some people who go down this path, these are the contributing factors. Will Spencer, I think, correctly identifies. And I thought this before Will Spencer did this article, but this is what I wrote. I said, if you're engaged in X debates and new right circles, this is a good article to noodle on. I don't agree with every conclusion, but there's a lot to glean from this. Thankful to Will Spencer for writing. And then almost immediately, since I saw that people were reading way more into this than I ever intended, I said, this article actually advances the conversation. I'm interested in people who can thoughtfully do that. I may mention it on the podcast and explain some of the areas I diverge with Will on, like using the term heritage American, but to be hastily dismissive doesn't seem smart to me. Now, this is something I kind of wanted to just keep on X, because I think X is where this issue is primarily happening. But I'm not naive enough to think that this isn't on YouTube or on Facebook or on Instagram or on these other social media platforms, and it's getting into some churches. It's becoming a point of discussion. And I know the people who support this podcast in general, I've asked my supporters, and it doesn't seem like it's the high priority. It's not something to focus on. And so I don't want to derail too much attention to this. I think what's happening with the Greer documentary is so much more important in so many ways. But I do think this is worth at least giving a casual mention to. And if it's Will Spencer who's the one that's tying some of these threads together and other people aren't doing it, then I think it's still worthwhile to consider some of the things that he puts in this particular article. So I'm going to kind of skim through some of this, and I'll take questions on it. And if you have pushback, I'll definitely consider that too. But My first problem, honestly, with this article was the title. The dangerous secret your young men are keeping neo-Nazi thought has entered the church. If you really want to get young men, I don't think the goal of this was intended at young men. I think this was pastors he was trying to reach. But if you, and this might make pastors pay attention, but if you are going after young men, if you want young men not to be involved in this kind of thing, this is probably one of the worst headlines in my mind you could use, just because that's going to attract people. A dangerous secret? Man, I want to know about that. Neo-Nazi thought, it's a dangerous secret? Man, I want to be, I want to know the truth. And being edgy, of course, is the style right now. It's what's in vogue. So I don't even know if that headline accurately reflects exactly what the article, it definitely reflects one strand from the article, but I don't think it encapsulates all of it. So that was my first objection. But he says, he talks about temptation, and he says that he foreshadows that he had this moment of temptation and he gave in to this, buying into this neo-Nazi framework. Now, it could be, some people are saying this is just Will Spencer trying to kind of reinvent himself, and he's trying to get away from the baggage that he has because he was in support of this just a year ago, if a little more than a year ago. That could be, that could very well could be part of the motivation, but not the reason that I think there's some value in this. So he talks about a few things. He talks about a father famine first. Now, I've talked about this many times. I started talking about it mostly with the social justice issue, because I noticed this with even going to protests and stuff and talking to people. I don't think people were after taking down monuments to Civil War soldiers. I think they were after taking down monuments that they associated with dad and mom, to be quite honest with you. I do think, yes, they have their historical grudges, but I think that there was instability in the home that did contribute. So Will Spencer is drawing a parallel and saying, hey, that's basically, look, there's 80% of the homes, let's see, that of the percentage of children living with a single parent, 80% are single mothers. This is a huge contrast from the 1960s to the, so he's drawing this parallel saying, look, there's more single households with mothers. That's going to affect things. I think you're right. And I think that would put young guys, especially, into a, either you're going to go one direction of the effeminacy and even homosexuality probably, or you're going to go, I mean, if you're extreme, I suppose, or you're going to like have this red pill journey that goes into directions of like, Andrew Tate, for example. You can go in these different directions based on those experiences. And he actually seems to indicate that he is not, I mean, let's see, does he say that was his experience? I don't think he says that it was his exact experience, but he basically says, look, I relate to some of this. So he's kind of writing about himself in this. And let's see, he then says the red pill's false promise. He gets into explaining the red pill. I don't think I need to do that for this podcast. And then he says this became a breeding ground for extremism. Now, this is kind of a point I've made before, but he talks about the Longhouse and 4chan. And in 4chan, there was, because people were going there, and the initial red pill was against feminism, it went into all these other areas of getting red pilled on historical events and what the government was doing and how Jews were controlling the world or other conspiracies. And it just went in all these different directions. And it was like an anything goes and forum. Now, I wasn't intimately involved in 4chan at all. I think I've went on it a few times back in the day. I do know people who were, who went down this path, and they will say that's exactly what made them go down this direction. I do remember, though, all the comments, and this is from 12, 15 years ago, maybe even in some cases 20 years ago, from people who I think had come off of 4chan, coming on to YouTube videos and other places, saying, you got to watch this World War II revisionism thing, or you got, it was like out of nowhere. And then you would try to converse, because I did with some of these guys, and it was like brick walls everywhere, and sort of like a worldview, for lack of a better term, that was like reinforced at every point. Right? There was rescuing devices for every objection. There was, it was like, I was like, where are these people coming from? Where is this happening? Like, you can't obviously go into your community and find this kind of thing. You're not going to find it in your men's group at church. So, where is it happening? And 4chan was, I think, probably one of the big places. So he talks about all this. I think it's good for people to know, for pastors in particular, to know that this can be a contributing element. And he goes into some of the sources that are used on that particular platform. So, and he's right about some of this. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the Learned Elders of Zion. I had to read that a few years ago. And he highlights a few of the documentaries. I know one of them I had like 15 years ago, I had watched some of it because I saw so many people posting it. I think the Last Battle was the name of it. I think he talks about that at some point. But anyway, he ties some of these threads together and he shows some of the memes. I've actually seen this meme before. So when I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, I've seen that meme before. I've seen it posted on some of my content. And there's different versions of it. And for those who are just listening, it's basically a Jewish guy who's controlling the Marxists, the feminists, kind of the gangbangers, every element of the counterculture, Black Lives Matter. It's all a Jewish person. Antifa, every single one of them. It's just the Jewish interest. And the solution is to either band together with pagans with Christians, or here's one with a pagan and a Muslim. And in one of these, I guess there's a sort of a Nazi symbol on it. And I've actually seen some of these memes. So that was one of the things that I think caught my attention. I was like, oh yeah, I recognize what he's talking about. Now the Turner Diaries, I did not recognize at all. I'll be honest with you on that. And I think he's done more reading than I have on this. But anyway, he goes through some of these sources and he says, look, if you got guys in your church, and I do know some pastors who have this happening at their churches, and these guys are coming in, and this is for pastors. So put the politics aside for a moment. I understand that politically, it makes no sense to focus on these people and all of that. I get that. I wrote a whole chapter in my book about conservative Nazi hunters, and I make all those points. If you're a pastor, though, and you have the unity of your church being disrupted because there's guys in there who have been kind of marinating in this, and they want to come in and red pill others at your church, and they're having conversations about it, and it's being used to undermine the authority of those who aren't sufficiently red pilled on this. Your normie, you have a normie pastor, quote unquote, and he doesn't know these things. That is where I think there's some benefit to connecting some of these threads to gain an understanding for where some of these people might be coming from. That's it. That's the extent of my recommendation. Where I diverge, and I do diverge pretty significantly with this article, is some of his solutions for this, I think, are kind of, to me, kind of bonkers. So one of them, and I'm going to actually have to do a key search here to find it where he says it, but he's going after people like me here. He says, so Joe Rogan interviewed Dale Cooper, aka Martyr Maid, the host of a history podcast who has attempted to normalize the narrative through scholarly revisionism about Winston Churchill. Scholarly, I don't know, whatever. I don't think it's scholarly revisionism, but it's pop history. But Daryl Cooper does a good job with his pop history. Worst of all, Reformed pastors have released videos talking about Talmudic Judaism, heritage Americans, and low IQ minorities, all of which are dog whistle. So this is where, so he's lumping a bunch of things together here. So heritage Americans is a term that I've used, right, to try to platform or center on the fact that America, even though it's a young country, quote unquote, it does have a heritage. It's an Anglo-Protestant heritage. And we can't have even immigration that has any chance of assimilation without recognizing this fact. America has to be something. It can't be nothing. So a heritage, a shared place, a tradition, and set of experiences over time, that's holistic, that includes things like ancestry and but also, cuisine and all the other things that go into an identity. There has to be an identity. You have people, and this is, Will Spencer, he hints at this, but I don't think he gets into it as much as I would. You do have a generation of people that rightly feel, in many cases, that they've been robbed of their actual identity. And I think Gen Zers in particular, you've moved around a lot. You've lived in manufactured housing. You haven't been told exactly what your history is. You've been on media your whole life, and you don't even know the lores and legends. I mean, your whole lingua franca now is movies or memes. You're on Ancestry trying to figure it out because mom and dad, maybe they weren't even there for you. Your whole life in some cases has been instability, right? This doesn't go for everyone, by the way, but I've seen too much of this. I've known too many people that this describes their background. And so you're looking for it somewhere. And if you don't offer them anything, if you say basically the liberal order, man, like you're just an individual, you get to choose what you want to be and no one can tell you otherwise. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. That's what got us here. I think the Heritage American thing is an attempt to say, no, you actually belong to something. You're a link in a chain that's bigger than you. It's not just even the church. I know a lot of guys have tried to say, well, the church is your identity now. Sorry, guys, that's not a holistic identity in every sense. That is a primary identity. That is a spiritual identity. That is an important identity. That is not going to satisfy all the longings of someone who feels like they've been robbed of their past. Let's face it, even people who grew up in a stable setting oftentimes feel like they're living in ruins because of what liberalism has done. Because of what we saw in 2020 was, I think, a manifestation of what was already there. It was already happening in our education, in our entertainment, in our politics. It was a denial of the traditional things that made America what it is, and a vilification then of certain of those elements, namely Christianity, white European ancestry and traditions. You had to platform all these other things. That's going to damage. That is going to do significant damage, and it has. And if you don't offer any alternative positive vision, then you're going to get people who want to go it's your genetics. That's who you are. And that is part of who you are, right? There's no denying that, but it's not all of who you are. Or we're going to blame this on a group. It's solely this group that did this to you. Now, maybe there's a contributing influence from a particular group. But it does get reductionistic. It does become the universal explainer easily when it gets into an ideological kind of frame. And that stuff, that puts you down a black pill. It gets deterministic. What can you even do about it? People don't care. You have to love your people in place. And that's what the whole idea of Heritage America is. But obviously Will Spencer, he doesn't care for that, right? I think, I have views on the Talmudic Judaism thing, and if people have questions about it, I'll go down that road, but I don't find it necessary. The other thing I disagreed with here, and I think there's a point, but I think Will missed it, is, in my opinion, and if Will listens to this, hopefully it's something maybe you can noodle on, Will. Okay, here it is. He says, if a man applying for membership in a church cannot or will not examine these views, and he's talking about neo-Nazi beliefs. Actually, he's talking about deterministic belief. Like if you think Jewish people are behind all the problems, right? If he can't examine these views, and I guess neo-Nazi stuff would be included in that, I strongly advise slowing down the membership process. He says these views spread virally. If the man is admitted, he will most certainly sow them in others. So he's saying any person that has these beliefs is going to basically proselytize for them. I don't know that that's true. I think there's a lot of people who keep quiet about these views. It's a possibility. But the other thing here is, well, what does he say? Let me read the end and then I'll give you more. The danger is not that the views are wholly false. Rather, like all convincing lies, it's that they draw incorrect conclusions from partially accurate observations. So I want you to hear this. Will does emphasize there is a partial accuracy here. Feminism, the mass production of pornography, and the normalization of homosexual lifestyle have indeed led to the moral and civilization decline of the West. Men and women who identify as ethnically Jewish, such as George Soros, World Economic Forum leader Klaus Schwab, Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, Gloria Steinman, Harvey Milk, Al Goldstein, have led to those efforts, but claims that the Jews, so this is the distinction he's making, as a whole are executing a multi-generational conspiracy to subvert white Christian men, paints with too broad a brush. And then he gives a bunch of names of people who are not Jewish, who have tremendously impacted society in negative ways, including Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Friedrich Nietzsche, Charles Darwin, Mary Wollstonecraft, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. He goes on and on. So I think this is a worthwhile point, but I disagree with his application of this point. So his application of the point is there's a membership barrier there. You need to ask people whether they agree with these ideologies. Now, a few years ago, there was, I think with some of the kickback against the woke stuff, there was a desire in leadership specifically. I never heard membership, but in leadership to ask these questions. And I think that was appropriate. So if you have leadership for a church, let's see, and I am drawing a parallel here, and I'll explain why in a moment. And someone, let's say, believes the 1619 Project narrative. You've got to make sure that that's the pastor you actually want, because it's not just that they have a different view of history. It's that they have different views on a whole bunch of other things. For example, if someone dives into the 1619 Project, there's a high likelihood that they probably buy into critical race theory, and that they see race as the lens through which, or racial dynamics as this lens by which you look at everything. And so they reduce reality. Now that's going to affect inevitably how they look at scripture. Now, I think this is different than that issue, but the objections of like, oh, it's just history, those don't make quite sense to me, because if it's just history, it's usually not just history. Usually your view on history is motivated by other factors, or connected at least to other factors. So someone who has gone hard red pilled on these things and is going down like let's say a hard Holocaust denial path. Usually, I'm not saying all the time, but usually that comes with other things attached to it. There's a high likelihood that that person has thrown out what we would consider a scholarly process by which you approach history, or a process of adjudicating what happened in the past, and is instead being reactive to narratives that have been shoved down their throat their whole life. It doesn't mean, by the way, and there's a spectrum here. It doesn't mean that the net has been cast so broad. I think this is an intentional strategy that anyone who questions any element, whether it's numbers or what happened at a certain concentration camp, they get lopped in with someone who just denies the whole thing happened, which is ridiculous to me. There are people who do scholarly work, and they're trying to look at the primary sources and figure out what happened. But I'm saying someone who goes down that road to the point of they just start denying what happened in history because it doesn't fit their narrative, that is going to affect other things. And that could very well affect even the way that they look at scripture. For leadership, it makes sense to me to have conversations like this. If there's a political issue that's going on that's tied to the other things that could affect theology or affect pastoral leadership. For membership, though, this is kind of innovative. For membership, we have, when someone comes into a church, the only question really is, do they agree with the fundamental doctrines? Do they agree with the mission of that church? So that might include things that aren't as fundamental, but but secondary. So if they're coming into a particular church, do they have evidence of true saving faith? That's it. If we start adding other things to this, especially if we start adding things, and I don't think Will does this necessarily, but if we start saying someone's not a Christian if they have a different view on World War II or something, then we run into some real theological problems. We start adding things, and it is, I'm sensitive to this. It is a very quick jump to get from you don't have the full gospel or something like that. So this is where I disagree with Will on this. I don't think you add a barrier for church membership based upon, you don't make that a gate at the intake to church membership. But I do think if it is an issue in your area, and I did have a pastor recently tell me where he lives, this is a huge, huge issue. And I'm like, well, you live, I've never seen that in other areas, but in this area, apparently, this is a huge, huge issue. He's had threats from, he calls them white supremacists, but he's had threats at his church from guys who are buying a neo-Nazi ideology. He's had, and it's someone I know, so I have no reason to doubt what he's saying. He's had people come in and want to teach these things. Well, in that circumstance, if you have a leader, you may want to ask them what they think about that, because it's about the unity of the church at that point. And that conversation will lead into other conversations. And is one of the point I was trying to make is bringing it back to an issue that we all understand maybe a little more. If it was 1619 project stuff, you might find in a conversation with someone that this comes down to maybe that person's okay with lying because if it supports their political narrative, or maybe this person is putting Black people and supposedly what they remember, which I think is a front for Marxists, but that becomes like, it's an idolatry thing. Like that person becomes like the canon that you can't question. Right. And you might run into these things and then it does become a theological issue, but initially on the surface, it's not. And I don't think it should be a test for membership. I think that gets you into dangerous territory. So those are my apprehensions. But yes, I do think that there is some merit to some of the things that Will's tying together here. That's not an endorsement of everything Will Spencer, and it's certainly not an endorsement of everything in the article. I tried to make that clear from the beginning, but I think some people had some hard time with that. And I realize there's a lot of people who don't care for Spencer. So I will take questions on this. And anything's fair game in this particular subject. I don't mind for this episode, not for every episode. I do not want to deviate into this all too often because I don't want it to be a main focus. But I do think for ministry's purposes, sometimes it needs to be talked about. By the way, I did see this article from 2023. But along the lines, I'm just going to mention this in passing of what Spencer was saying in that particular article. I found this fascinating. This is from Business Insider. Americans' broken housing market is making millennials and Gen Z lonelier. Anyways, it talks about the instability of living in apartments and not being in like an actual home, a piece of ground you can call your own. I thought it was very interesting. So I do think there's, if you get into the data and stuff, like here's another one. This is from the Census Bureau. I think this is what Will might have even cited, that mothers maintain 80% of single parent family homes. If you start to get into some of the data on Gen Z and those younger, it is kind of frightening, the amount of deracination that has taken place. And that is going to have effects on society. So I don't think it's wrong to point that out and to say it could be manifesting in these areas. People I know who have gone down these roads, the ones that I've at least had intimate connection with, they've confirmed that to me, that played a big part in it. I know there's people very sensitive to this because maybe that wasn't your story, or maybe it is your story, but you just don't, it's an insecurity, or you want to lash out about anyone who would insinuate that. I don't know what to say. Like the woke stuff, I think the post-liberal stuff in general, or the alternative explanations for the liberal order in general, attracts people who want those explanations, who are dissatisfied with the status quo. And oftentimes they're dissatisfied with the life they grew up in. I don't know how else to say it. That's just a fact, I suppose. But, and I'm one of those people that I'm trying to get into an older, more rooted conservative tradition. It's why we're doing the Patron stuff with the Anglo-American conservative tradition and doing the great books, because I do think in the heart of Americans, there still is a beat for old Norman Rockwell paintings and local Christmas traditions, and In God We Trust in the local town square with a church bell. And I think these things, the policies that people advocate, make no sense because they're globalist and they run over what they're having nostalgia for in their minds. But I still think that there is, maybe I'm naive, but I still think there is this heartbeat that Americans have. And I want to tap right back into that. I think that's the winner. And that's what the right can easily tap into. That's the ethos. I think CJ Angle's doing a terrific job trying to tap into some of this, but it is not, it takes, I have reasons for thinking it's not gaining as much traction as I'd like, but maybe it will. We'll see. All right. So I'll take some questions and then I will end the podcast by reading for you something I wrote in 2021, which I think might surprise you. I was surprised almost when I saw it, because I was like, I've been saying this stuff for a long time. And sure enough, I found this article from 2021 and I'm like, yeah, I know. It's exactly what I've been saying. So some of the things that I'm saying now, I'm getting kind of in trouble for, but if you go back and check the record, I've been saying them. My critiques of ideology, that is. All right. Where to start here? Every weekend in Chicago is more deadly than all the violence committed by guys who read the Turner Diaries combined. Totally agree with you there. Absolutely 100%. No question about it. I I believe America needs to prioritize Israel above all other nations, given God's promises to their fathers and given Satan's history against the nation and Jewish people. I understand that sentiment. I definitely grew up going to religious right events where that was certainly championed. I disagree. And the reason I do is this: the modern nation state of Israel would be in disobedience. And it's not just because of Talmudic, quote unquote, Judaism. You actually have a lot splits within the Knesset over religious Jews versus secular Jews. And what is Israel going to be? What Israel has been is not a quote unquote Talmudic Jewish nation. It has been a secular Jewish nation that is a pipe dream for liberalism in the Middle East, where it's very illiberal. I think that is one of the main reasons that Western countries support Israel. It is effectively and this is the critique woke people have of it. It is effectively a colonial outpost of liberalism, of Western liberalism, liberal democracy in the Middle East, and they're right about that. So they're in disobedience to God. They've rejected the Messiah as a whole, both groups that I just referenced. And if they're in disobedience to God, that means they would be under judgment, right? So I think you can be a dispensational person, and you can recognize this, that, things would have to change for this to be the culmination of even the promises that dispensationalists talk about. So I do disagree with that, but I do understand the reasons that people, and I don't try to condemn everyone who holds that view necessarily. Thanks for covering this. Appreciate your channel. Thanks, Pastor Grant. I appreciate it. The only common experience and identity most young guys have is becoming foreigners in their own land, says John Carter, with no inheritance and being called the worst names for complaining about it. It's true. I think that's, I think that's broad brushed a bit, but I think as a general observation, yes, that's a big dynamic that's happening. To what extent, I don't know exactly, but it's a big dynamic. And if you get in some of the chat groups, you would think it's universal, online at least. It's sad to me. It really is. Watching old Disney stuff with my daughter, even. Yes, I have gone on YouTube and for free found some Disney sing-alongs that have Zip Dee Dee Doo Dah Day in them and that kind of thing. And it's disheartening watching them, because you're like, wow, we used to have this. Like, we used to actually, even Disney was proud of American heritage and stuff. And now they obviously, you're just condemned by the media, and that's going to have an effect. There's no doubt about that. So, I mean, and this is one of the things that's an ongoing conversation with white identitarian stuff is like, and this, I can't get into this fully. I definitely have thoughts on it, but the left has pushed so hard against that groups that were divergent before, right? You had your Germans in the Midwest, and you had your Scandinavians in the Pacific Northwest, and you had your Southerners and Northerners and Appalachians, and there's all these differences between white people groups, and there still are, by the way, and they are very significant. But because of a common seeing themselves, the younger people especially, as their lot is tied together because of a common attack against all white people and white men in particular, obviously that's going to do something. That is going to necessitate an answer that meets the threat, which means vindicating that if white people are being attacked, then white people, even if they're divergent in their cultural backgrounds, have to band together to meet this attack. That's one of the things you also have going on. And that's a legitimate conversation to have. It really is. It's not, that shouldn't just be dismissed as, oh, you're just unstable, or you're just, I don't know, you just have identity issues, personal hangups or whatever. Like, there's smart people who don't have those things that are looking at the landscape and saying that there has to be some kind of an activist arm to represent the interests of people who are being attacked. So that's something that's going on right now too, and that has to get some airtime. I would ask prospective members, okay, so in the case of church membership, what they thought of the shape of the earth before this. Right. Yeah, right. Like, to your point, I totally agree. You can't just like how long is this membership list going to be, right? Did you believe in lizard people at one time? I've met people like that. Literally, I remember someone came to me who I knew them very tangentially. They were Christian, and they came to me, but they believed the lizard people were controlling the world. And I just I don't even know what to do with you, but they were convinced, and they had all kinds of like rescuing devices for all my objections too. And they show you the picture of Hillary Clinton with her eyes, and she's like, you can't tell me that's not a lizard. I mean, now that you know that, it's like, oh, he's going to become a church member. I mean, I probably want to have a conversation with him just to be like, that's kind of weird, man. Like, what, tell me where your head's at. But yeah, are you going to come up with a list of like every single thing that's kind of odd or off, or could potentially be a problem? No, it's an affirmation. That's what church membership is. It's an affirmation of, I believe the doctrine of this church. I want to serve and use my spiritual gifts here. And I'm a Christian. I have true saving faith. That's it. That's all it should ever be. You start adding to it, you get problems. That's my opinion. Are you saying that Business Insider is arguing for blood and soil? Yes, they are. Here's the dirty secret. Everyone believes on a basic level that being attached to the things that they love, the security that they have, is important. They just don't want it on a broad level, or they don't want it for other people, or right? So everyone has their groups. You can't not think in groups. It is inescapable, and you're going to try to gain some stability from whatever group you're in. Let's see. So Pete Quinones apparently has an episode with Tim Kelly, How White Flight Created the Suburbs. I have listened to it, and it is a really good episode. Yes, thank you for that recommendation. Was that actually Tim? Who was that? Tim Kelly? I need to look into that, because I remember listening and I was like, I should have this guy on my podcast because it was so fascinating. All those Norman Rockwell things are being destroyed by importing foreigners into every small to medium-sized town in the U.S. Yep, no doubt about that. Israel has absurd influence over almost every Republican congressman and substantially over Democrats too. Yep, no argument there. By the way, there's some of this stuff is X stuff that I don't like talking about on the podcast, but I did make a post a while ago that was basically like, I don't think Americans should be so like give it a break. Stop talking about the Middle Eastern conflicts. Like, you shouldn't care so much about what's happening at the Gaza Strip. And it was taken like, oh, John doesn't care at all about foreign influence in this country because look at the influence Israel has. And that obviously wasn't what I was saying at all. I clarified it, but it didn't matter. People who wanted to take it the way they wanted to take it just took it that way. Yeah, I think foreign governments, I believe, should not have. I don't even think they should be able to lobby, to be quite frank with you. I think, and for Israel especially, they don't have to meet some of the requirements, as I understand it, that other lobbying countries that have lobbyists have to meet. I don't think that's right. Now, the thing is, this is a little inescapable. You're going to get this no matter what rules you make, because foreign countries see the United States as the big kid on the block. And if they have the means, they're going to try to influence us. Right now, was it Qatar just a few weeks ago, right? They're going to invest so much, and Donald Trump's bragging about it. I'm sitting there thinking, well, that's not good. I don't really want that. Even if it's good economically, I don't really want that. Do I really want all these foreign investments in the United States? Like, no, not in the United States. Overseas in places where we have shared interests. Okay, that's one thing, but no, I don't like any of this. John, is not the content of the messenger matter, even if the message may have some good points. Would not Will Spencer's current lonely life affect his take on cure for male loneliness? Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to see Will Spencer he's engaged, and I think he's getting married, and he's admitted that he's critiquing where he comes from. This is his background. He was on these places. He was on 4chan. He was doing this stuff. So I think that gives it maybe an element of credibility. He's been there, but at the same time, yes, you're absolutely right. I think that if there was someone who did not have that experience who would write on this, I would prefer that. My thing is, I just haven't seen anyone take this issue on and connect some of those threads anywhere, at least in a written form like that, in the Christian world, at least. So that's why I think it was helpful. And it was just an X post, and it would have stayed just an X post, except for all the, in my opinion, somewhat ridiculous knee-jerk reactions to it, of thinking that I fully endorsed everything this person says or does, or I want to platform them. And no, I literally, that's why I put qualifications in it. I literally just want to, for people who are navigating this, I want them to connect some of these threads, and I want them to actually have some compassion too. There are guys who are coming from places of legitimate questions that haven't been answered. people who aren't willing to speak to them about it, they freak out every time the person starts bringing up, like questioning, let's say, interracial marriage, or questioning should women vote, or and then someone freaks out. The pastor that they wanted to trust freaks out or something. And it's like, guys, you've got to take an interest in these people too, right? You cannot have a toxic empathy for the social justice crowd and their hangups and their problems and their concerns, and not have at least somewhat of a concern for people who are coming from other places. If you're a pastor, you don't have that luxury. You have to deal with everyone who comes across you in your office from your desk. So, so I think if someone wants to send me a better article from someone else, I will gladly, put that out there. But yeah, I'm making the podcast so people don't misunderstand what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. Let's see here. The woke are right in some observations of the status quo. Yes, they are. I think that actually Marxists have even made some correct observations. Their solutions are terrible, but there are some. For example, let me give you an example. I don't. So I don't think it's worth it to source anything from Marxists. I don't cite them. Their reasons for thinking what they're thinking are, I think, always wrong. Just about. Their solutions are always wrong, but there are times that Marxists will look at, let's say, the effects of the commercialization and the Industrial Revolution and see the instability. And for example, the term social justice. There's two uses of this term. To give you a brief example here. In the early 20th century, it was just an Americanization of Fabian socialism. So it was on the left. It still is. There was another way it was used by Catholic encyclicals, like Pope Leo in his Rerum Novarum, I think it was. He talks about social justice. And what he's talking about is, look, there used to be a landed gentry. Their lots were tied together. They had an in-group preference for the people who worked on their land. And there was a mutual relationship there. And if you read books like Washington Irving's Old Christmas, you'll find that responsibility was beyond just money or provision. It was also religion. You'd have, in England at least, you would finance the church if you were a wealthy landowner. That would be the parish. The parish was your land, your finances, and the people who worked for you. And it was a feudal system in a sense, really. I mean, it was feudalism. And that system was broken down during the Industrial Revolution. And so you have the Catholic Church saying, listen, landowners, you have a responsibility to the people who work your land. You can't just now, because you're detached somehow, you're not sharing the same land. The person's coming in and clocking in, and you own the means of production, but you don't own the house they live on or the church they go to. You're not overseeing those things. You can't just shirk your social responsibilities. So the Catholic Church is saying this. Conservatives are saying this. Edmund Burke is saying similar things about, like, we need land, guys. We need a shared lot together. We need shared. If we don't have these mutual relationships, part of the reason I lean into the Heritage America thing, by the way, if we don't have these, our lots aren't tied together because of experience and place and traditions and religion and all these other things, we will be unstable. Ideology is not going to bind us together. Marx came in. Marx is an ideologue, and Marx says, you know what? It's all boiled down to this one thing, guys. It's all about class conflict. That's it. This is nothing new. Every season of history has had the proletariat, the bourgeoisie, basically the people who own things and the people who work things. And this conflict is age old, but one day through the Hegelian dialectic, we'll get to this point that we won't have it anymore. We're going to finally reach this utopian world where we end class distinctions. Nuts, terrible, satanic, evil, and denying a fundamental aspect of human identity to boot. Now, there's other people who came in later with their own solutions to this, right? And their own, all of identity is swallowed up in this one thing or that one thing. History is just this. It's just the patriarchy. That's what history is. Or as Hitler said in Mein Kampf, like every human impulse is motivated by racial self-preservation. Like everything just comes back to this, right? So there's all these like kind of things you can latch onto and then build an entire system around. And so anyway, where was I going with this? I think I was just saying that when you see these different ideologies or approaches critique each other, sometimes they make valid points and they point out weaknesses. And it's not a coincidence to me that like Richard Weaver was had been a Marxist, that I think Russell Kirk, if I'm not mistaken, had been a Marxist, that a lot of the guys who populate conservative thought and neoconservative thought, even they end and going to liberalism or jumping to a more rooted conservative idea. Eugene Genovese is a good example of this, right? Total Marxist, one of the best historian on American slavery of the 20th century. Total Marxist who started getting into the Southern agrarians and realized, oh my goodness, this wasn't exactly how it was painted. And he became basically a paleoconservative. So I think it is worth, if you can do it with discernment, it is worth reading broadly, sometimes from ideologies where you're going to find these critiques. Also, would not consider asking extra questions to be an example of hard shepherding. You know what? I've heard that this is the first time I'm hearing about hard shepherding. I don't know what that is. Maybe someone can explain it to me, and maybe I'm out of the loop. Disney made really great family-friendly pro-American content until Walt died. Yep. There's a really good book called The Trojan Mouse. I did an interview with the author, and it's so good, tracing Disney's compromise. If we could get like the old Disney kind of, I'm not saying in every way it was perfect, but if we could get something similar to that, that would be so amazing. Someone go work on that. Aaron's recent episode on George Washington's foreign policy is great. Please go watch that or listen to it. I haven't heard it, but I can probably guess what he said. And I'm a George Washington guy on this stuff. Let's see here. All right. Historian David Irving went down a very scholarly way. So you're not supposed to admit this publicly, but yes, I've read David Irving's stuff. His book, he has a diplomatic history of, what's it called? Is it called, I think it's called Churchill's War. And it's a pretty good book. Now people take Irving and things he said after his defamation lawsuit, and he lost that, and things he said since then, because the only crowds that seemed to have been interested in platforming at that time were groups that were, we'll just say, somewhat zesty. And Irving has been clipped making jokes and saying things that have then been used to discredit him. But if you look, same thing with Will Spencer, right? Am I going to, with David Irving, say, oh, look, he said this one thing over here in a joke to a crowd? I'm just going to cast out all of his scholarly work over here. No, like that's not how things work. And I think that his diplomatic histories are, from what I've read, I'm open. Someone can show me quotes if they think he was off somewhere, but I think they're pretty exceptional. And he does have some, I think it seemed to me, at least early on, it was very unfair, the treatment that he got, because he was broad brushed with people who don't think the Holocaust even happened. And he was just broad brushed with, you just deny this. That word Holocaust denier, man, it just gets applied so broadly. And that's one of the things. Even with Will Spencer's article, the broad brush I don't appreciate, right? Like, yes, there are people who go down dark paths ideologically, and Will, sounds like you were on one of those paths. But you come saying that critiques of Talmudic Judaism or critiques of Heritage America or promotions of Heritage America are somehow in this same line. That ends up discrediting what I think are some good things that he had to say. All right, I'm gonna have to land the plane here because we're about an hour and 43 minutes in. Wow, time goes. Protesting, J.D. Hall wrote articles on it. It is rooted in older charismatic churches. Oh, okay, hard shepherding. Okay, I'll have to look into it. Thank you, I Am Guardian. Appreciate that. All right, I'll take one more question after this, and then that's it. I asked one of my pastors whether he'd sooner invite a Christ denier or a Holocaust denier to dinner, and he conceded that it was a point of idolatry on his point. Good for you. That's a good question to ask, because the fact that James Lindsay got traction in Christian circles and continues to be platformed by TP USA Faith is outrageous to me. And it just shows you atheism somehow, and being pro-LGBT, pro-homosexual, at least normalization, we'll say, pro-abortion, that doesn't, at least up until recently, that is not a reason to disassociate with someone or use that against someone, that association. But yes, for some reason, if you were to say, I read a David Irving book and he made some good points, somehow now that is used against you. So I think we have to think like Christians. We do have to think honestly take a breath also and just think through things rationally. Just because I did this yesterday on the podcast about guilt by association. Just because someone shares an article by someone, literally the example I used, doesn't mean they endorse everything about that person. Doesn't mean they're promoting everything about that person. Doesn't mean they might not even have disagreements with the article, which I said I did. But we have to be careful of the very rigid red team, blue team stuff. The friends enemies idea is a very good political principle to consider, because you have your political goals and you have people who are against those political goals. And you have to kind of, at a political strategy, you have to break down the political landscape into those two categories. Not everything breaks down into that. And every facet of life isn't that. And there are going to be times that some people, even in the political sphere, are your friends, and times that they are your enemies, also depending on the issue. It's not always cut and dry. So just, put your thinking cap on. That's my encouragement. And hopefully that helps some of you. All right. I said I was going to do this and I totally forgot. But I guess this is my vindication. So somewhat. So maybe if you will indulge me this opportunity, I posted this on X, but it didn't really get any traction a while ago. And I'll see if I
J.D. Greer was what?
We're not watching J.D. Greer again. Hold on. I'm going to see if I can pull this up. I shared this on the podcast, but it was in 2021. This actually was one of the episodes. I don't remember which one it was, but it was an episode for a podcast. And it's just for those who support the podcast. Yes. Do I change my mind on things? Sure. Right. But overall, have I been pretty stable on the issues I talk about? I try to be careful with what I talk about. I want to develop convictions before I go out there. And if I talk about something that's not a conviction, I'll tell you. And on this particular issue, I think I've been pretty consistent. And this is vindication of that. This is from 2021. And these were notes that I used for a podcast. And I used to do that sometimes. I would write out my thoughts before doing a podcast. And this was on on children who go woke. Maybe that's the title of the podcast. I don't know. But this is what I said in it. A frequently asked question is, how did my son or daughter go woke? It's understandable to ask this because much like a religious conversion, someone who's contracted the disease is generally impervious to rational discussion. They become obsessed with exterminating social ills to the point it becomes part of their identity. Anyone who challenged their chosen identity is then questioning their reason for existence in their own minds. This is why I wrote a chapter on the social justice religion in my forthcoming book, Christianity and Social Justice, Religions and Conflict. So this is before I even put that book out. Of course, all people are different, but there is a general pattern among those from otherwise conservative households who go woke. Usually they weren't entirely grounded in an identity of their own, whether it be familial, regional, or religious. What generally happens is they learn about something they previously did not consider, such as the horrible stories of deprivation and mistreatment during slavery or something similar. Sometimes stories are true, but usually they're embellished and a necessary imperative and material purposely left out or distorted. So it's interesting to me. I'll just comment here. It's interesting to me, like the Holocaust thing has become such a big discussion in Christian right circles. But a few years ago, you didn't hear about the Holocaust as much. It was the slavery stuff. That was what was taking down our monuments, attacking our history. So that's the context I'm writing in. Richard Delgado talks about the centrality and importance of narrative for critical race theory. This is why the emotionally charged stories invoke anger towards certain social classes, i.e. white people, arouse suspicions of being deceived for having not heard them before, and propel the hearer toward activism against people today who they believe are somehow connected to these sins of the past, usually in front of their own family first. The stories become a kind of sacred literature. They can never be questioned, contextualized, or minimized. Interestingly, the progressive era was filled with stories of deprivation incurred by primarily white people. Stories such as the true accounts of what took place during Sherman's March or the atrocities committed against white settlers on the frontier clothed certain classes in the garments of martyrdom and made them the objects of pity. So in other words, white people are the evil people, 2021. But hey, you go back 100 years, white people were the subjects of some classes of white people, at least the subjects of pity. So I'm saying that the progressives didn't seem to have a problem, the original progressives, with thinking of white people as victims in some level. This does not spark an ideological desire to rip down present systems as much, but it did help inspire a kind of romantic zeal and pride in one's white race and against others. Activists of that time period activists literally called for social justice through things like eugenics. And this is true. I talk about this in Social Justice Goes to Church. In Germany, of course, with media and government help, now remember, as I'm reading this, I wrote this in 2021 and no one batted an eye, at least from the right. In Germany, of course, with media and government help, something much more aggressive and similar to today's social justice activism emerged. Germans were to awaken to the privilege of Jews, who bore the brunt of many social ills, from the degradation of the family through the pornography industry to the national embarrassment of World War I by helping Germany lose by supposedly dodging military service, to allegedly rigging the stock market, etc. Germans became the grand victims and Jews the grand villains in this narrative, and all it took were some emotional stories repeated over and over. Those not properly grounded in their local communities, religions, and families bought the ideological nationalism. It became an all-encompassing ideology that substituted for these other natural identities by hijacking them or making them obsolete. Now, if I had to add anything to that today, I would probably say that I would emphasize even more so I said it, but the becoming, that this was something that developed. It didn't happen immediately. There were things that Germans were looking at, especially post Treaty of Versailles and Weimar Republic stuff, that you could point out, hey, this class of people seems like they're subverting us. And it resonated. And there's a few books I had to read for my Holocaust class and the World War II class on this topic. And one of the things that stuck out to me was, though, religiously grounded communities. Like, the more religious you were, it seems like the more resistant you were to the Nazi takeover, namely Catholics in Bavaria. And so I think that's an interesting thing that is worth more discussion, but more historical discussion and study. But I would still generally agree with what I said at that point. I do think that this became a universal explainer over time, especially post, Nuremberg laws. Of course, it did not help that the dead churches in Germany primarily went along with this, just as the dead churches in the United States are going along with today's social justice movement. All this is to say that properly grounding your child on who they are and where they're from is essential in keeping them from going in the same direction. Prepare them for stories they may hear, whether true or not, with a good anthropology. Teach them that it's man's heart that's evil, not the hearts of certain classes over others. Let them know that stories they are to pass down to their children and cherish, those who will become a guide to them. Obviously, that doesn't mean that there aren't classes of people that inflict damage on as a whole more than others. But your universal anthropology should be, though, that sin affects every man and being, every human being. Because once they undergo a woke religious conversion, it is very difficult to make them step outside the cult they've joined to consider things from a more objective perspective. The reasons parents find it difficult to communicate with their children once they become woke has little to do with facts and information and much to do with interpretation. Bible-believing parents who watch their children embrace Darwinism after going to high school and college are familiar with the problem. So I go into more of this, how, like, yeah, your child might be smart, but look, if someone knows a lot about Lord of the Rings, they're smart, but what they know it's stuff that didn't happen, right? Let's see. I talk about traditional parents do not believe the key to interpreting the key. So, like, that's the ideological thing. Like, if you have the key to interpreting everything, you're probably buying into some kind of a simplistic narrative. So I talk about that a bit. Most high school history textbooks don't mention the range wars or the Spanish flu, even though these were profound things in our history, but they don't fit the narrative. They don't fit the key that is supposed to unlock every historical event. So you emphasize the events that you can put your key into. History is the stories of men, and behind this lies providence. And so let's see, what else do I say? It's interesting. Ideologues, which describe academia, try to find an interpretive key. The best way I found to interact with ideologues is to tamper with the key. Take the key to their ultimate conclusions, insert a different key. Why should we interpret the history the way, hypothetically, according to how Jewish people have gained and controlled important positions? I said this in 2021. Switch out Nazi ideology for woke ideology and see what happens. All right. So obviously this isn't an argument for woke right, which I think is silly. Because the people, I'm woke right. Anyone who believes in hierarchy is woke right. But I think there are ideological things here at play. And I'll give you an example of me tampering with the key on X recently. I made a post about 19th century feminism. And of course, I got the typical, like, here's my chart with all the Jewish people who are involved in feminism. And it's a Jewish project. That's the thing. And they're all second wave feminists. And I was like, I'm talking about American 19th century feminism, which is a complete Yankee project. It is a Northeastern project. I know because I'm near the historical landmarks and I've been to them in the Northeast. And of course, this made people, it couldn't comport with some of the ideology that some people had bought into. Like, it had to be Jewish people behind this. It can't not be. And I'm saying, it could be that there was a feminist ideology in America before large populations of Ashkenazi Jews, because we had Sephardic Jews, but it was minimal and they mostly integrated, and they were in the South and they weren't in the Northeast. There's more Jews outside the Northeast when this was happening than in the Northeast where the feminism was happening. So anyways, Jewish people may be underrepresented, actually, the Sephardic Jews. But later on, yes, in the late 1800s, especially, you have waves of Ashkenazi Jews who come to the United States, and they tap into, and maybe change and shift it a bit, but they tap into a feminist ideology that was already here with the movement. Maybe that's the historical way to look at it. Maybe that's the narrative or the paradigm that actually fits the facts. But if you're obsessed with, it's got to be this one explanation for everything, then you just tie yourself up into these ridiculous knots sometimes. And that's my point. It's not saying that Jewish people don't have influence in some of these progressive moves. It's make sure the influence is at the scale that it actually existed at. Don't put it into, don't make it the universal explainer. I was saying this in 2021, guys. I've been saying this the whole time. It was never a controversy. It was people who think, oh, John's switching, John's going soft, John's shifting his views. That's what I've always said, guys. The record shows it. So that is a little defense, I guess, of myself there from people who are saying those things on X. But yeah, you can either believe it or not, whatever. But for my supporters, I think it probably, I think maybe some of you will remember this and maybe it'll help. All right. I said I'd take one more question. So what's the last question here? All right. I'll take it from Cosmic Treason. Cosmic Treason does a lot of comments. I appreciate you, Cosmic Treason. Let's see here. Because White, oh man, we're talking about the Corey Mahler, James White debate. I'm jumping into this mid. Where's the conflict? Okay. Wolf is Thomistic, Stephen Wolf, which means there isn't a common ground to debate Christian nationalist strategy, since he holds to a theological tradition where you can make stuff up, as Aquinas did. I guess I think you're representing the view of some people who have that view of him. Yeah, I would disagree with that. Sorry, John. No, it's fine. It's fine. No worries. Hey, I appreciate everyone in the stream. I hope that this has helped you maybe think through some of these issues a little more clearly. Like I said, my main focus moving forward right now is probably going to be some of this Greer stuff and SBC stuff. And there's stuff coming that you're going to have to see it when it comes. It's going to be fireworks, I think. So stay tuned for that. There's questions along the lines of some of the stuff I talked about in the second half of the podcast. Feel free to DM me. I don't mind that. And I can hopefully point you in a prudent direction if that's possible. I'm certainly not a key to all knowledge myself, but some of these things I've had to think about for a while. So love you guys. God bless. More coming. Bye now.